Hello and welcome to the new episode of Access Up's Space Defense and Security podcast. We have been recording quite a lot of episodes on intelligence and security and related domains which are overlapping on the conflict and the warfare studies as well as related to the political science as well. But today we'll be taking a look at a conflict which is not so mainstream in the media. And the guest, of course,
Okay.
she was previously on a podcast for like 2 or 3 episodes, and all her episodes actually received like a good engagement. The only reason we didn't get her on the podcast again because we wanted to basically cover some other domains as well. And I think last time we had covered West Sahel in a much more detailed manner, kind of I would say a surface level outlook on what it is and what the developments are. And now we're going to follow up and go much more deeper into it. So today's episode is the hidden war that could change Africa forever. And I'd like to welcome on board the today's guest, Aman Bezre. Hi, Aman. Welcome to that episode.
Hello, Omkar. Thank you so much for having me again. And indeed, I have been with you talking about the Sahel
Yes.
for a couple of episodes, and we covered JNIM and ALS and all of these also other political
Yes.
developments. And like you said, the Sahel is an underreported region.
Yes.
And in fact, it is slightly because of what's happening in the Middle East and the war between Iran on one side and Israel and the US on the other side, it's becoming sort of the forgotten region.
Absolutely.
However, a lot is happening there. So many important developments on the side of violent extremist organizations and state actors are happening, and it's all very important. And it could actually change the face of the Sahel region and West Africa. So I'm glad that we are going to talk about these developments today.
Absolutely. As usual, great to have you. And yeah, I'm excited for the conversation of today as well because we are going to go a lot more into the depth. Before starting everything, I'm
Mm,
really glad, that we are connecting again because so many developments have happened in past one and a
true.
half year. If I sit to basically calculate the amount of conflicts that I've seen, both in the mainstream and not in the mainstream, I'm like, how can I cover so many things? So I would
Of
like to tell
course.
our audience that, we are trying our best to cover whatever we can, especially the kind of information which is not in the mainstream media. And I would suggest everyone to listen to this episode very carefully because the information that Aman will be providing today is something that is not easily covered on the mainstream media. You might see 1,000 news coming about like China Taiwan issue or maybe US Israel conflict, but no one is really talking about this region because it doesn't. Firstly, I think it's a very kind of a territory where not so many journalists actually even go to cover that region from the mainstream media. But yeah, overall, I would like to tell you that please be seated for the today's episode in a careful manner because it's something now you won't find so easily, or even if you find it easily, it's very tough to connect the dots on the ground of this issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, to
Just
begin
just to
with,
let you know,
yeah,
Omkar,
yeah.
since the last time we spoke, 3 coups happened in the region.
Oh my
If
goodness.
we're just talking about the Sahel, we're not including any. So basically, Central Sahel, 3 coups happened
Yeah.
since the last time we spoke. So
Oh,
yes, a
I
lot
think
has
we even
happened.
saw, yeah, we kind of saw a similar thing in Bangladesh, but of course it was not fully orchestrated by any terror groups and all. But I think we saw kind of a military coup in Bangladesh as well, in the Asian region, in a
Of
similar
course,
way.
I've seen. Of course,
So yeah,
I've
it's,
followed the
so
news on that.
so to begin with, actually, uh, when jihadist groups like JNIM begin openly collaborating with ethnic and separatist rebel factions in the region, in Sahel region, I would specifically mention. Are we witnessing the birth of a completely new warfare model in Africa? One where ideology no longer matters and only power is something that matters. Also, one request, Aman, that can you also tell the audience regarding what is JNIM also in briefly? Because a lot
Yes,
of the
yes, of
audience is
course.
coming from defense core tech perspective and all, and they're not so much
Of
aware about the
course, of
political
course,
side. Yeah.
of course, of course. Happy to. Just to put things in context, we are
Yes.
talking about a specific incident that actually changed our understanding about ethnic rebel groups or armed political groups in northern Mali and JNIM. So you asked me about JNIM. JNIM is actually Al Qaeda arm in the Sahel region. It's called Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, and they have been operating in Mali and the wider Sahel region since 2017. They are now very well established. Initially, they were operating in northern Mali, in Kidal, in Menaka, in Gao regions. Now they've expanded to southern Mali and into Burkina Faso and Niger, and also Togo and Benin. So now we have seen JNIM establishing centers in northern Benin and centers in northern Togo. They also have spokespersons. So the group, as Al-Qaeda arm in the region, is expanding in the region. And obviously they are fighting the military regimes in this region, and also the Russian mercenary group, or what is now known as Africa Corps. So this is what JNIM is, and they are actually in conflict with the Islamic State in the region, similar to how it actually goes in other regions where Al-Qaeda branches fight with the Islamic State in a country or a specific slash region. So to talk about this specific incident on the 25th of April, JNIM, in cooperation with the FLA, which is an armed political group in northern Mali, mostly composed or largely composed of the Tuareg community in northern Mali, claimed responsibility for coordinated attacks across Mali, including against locations close to the capital. So here, this incident is very important because actually JNIM has a jihadi ideology. They want to implement Sharia. They have their own agenda. They have their own governance style based on Sharia and Islamic rules. They are the archetype of violent extremist organization. While if we look at the FLA, for example, it is mostly composed of the Tuareg community, largely considered secular, more open to liberal governance style. Actually, one of the most important element or component within the FLA was openly secular armed political group called Manila Movement for the Liberation of Aswad. So here we are seeing two different ideological groups cooperating together in conducting attacks against the Malian the Malian army. So why did that happen? To talk about why this happened, we need to look at the status quo of the country. What's happening is now that we have a military regime governing the country. They've tried that happened for like this military junta actually came to power after two coups in the country, and they tried to legitimize themselves, but obviously they are involved in major human rights violations. They are involved in marginalizing large communities in Mali. So they haven't been very welcomed by the people and obviously by JNIM. They also did not establish or could not establish communication channels between themselves and JNIM, and that's why JNIM is still fighting them, still conducting attacks against them. What made matters worse is that this military regime deployed Wagner, the Russian mercenary group, to the country, and they were actually involved in human rights violations. And that actually gave JNIM the pretext to fight them even more, because JNIM decided to frame itself as the defender of the people against these powers. So we have an already destabilized country with illegitimate or what can be considered illegitimate regime. We have an active VEO that wants to establish the Sharia Islamic law, and then we have what is known as the Tuareg rebel groups, although they have other components like Arabic and Songhai components. So it is an already fragile situation, and these actors are fighting against each other. But it got to a point where the FLA was unable to fight the regime or the military regime on its own. and got to a point where they cooperated with JNIM. Now, how is this going to play out for the FLA? We are still monitoring and seeing what
Yes.
would happen.
Absolutely. And just to basically add on to that, because you mentioned about the April 24 and 25 attacks. So these attacks possibly expose like fragile Sahelian states have become. Uh, I mean, like how fragile they have become despite years of Western efforts into the counterterrorism operation. So, from your perspective and the current complete analysis that you have done or carried out, I would say in a extensive manner, has the war on terror in the Sahel fundamentally failed, or is it still evolving, or are there still any? Is there any fuel left? That's what I would like to ask.
Yeah, yeah. To be honest, yes, it's exactly that, Omkar. What's happening now is that the European war on terror has failed. We can say that it has failed, and that has been the case since the European forces decided to leave the Sahel. They left Mali and then Niger, and basically. The French dropped the microphone and decided that they are not going to fight IS or JNIM on behalf of these military regime that came to power by coups. Now, what we are seeing is that we have violent extremist organizations. So not just JNIM, we also have the Islamic State that operates in the region. We have two violent extremist organizations on one side, and then we have military regimes on the other side that are trying to contain the expansion of these VEOs. They are trying to even limit their attack. Clearly, they are not succeeding in that. And what made matter worse, and again, I've mentioned this before, was the deployment of the Russian mercenary group, which was Wagner at the beginning and now rebranded into Africa Corps. And why did it make it worse? Because these like mercenary group committed committed human rights violations against the people in these countries and attacked marginalized communities, killed individuals, killed women, killed children, and they've been really inflicting pain on the local community, and therefore they gave a pretext for JNIM and now IS to actually fight them back, and that is fueling the conflict more and more.
Yes.
So yes, we could say that the European war on terror in the Sahel region has failed, but also these military regimes and their Russian partner is not making any success as well. So what we're seeing now is the expansion of operations by these violent extremist organizations. They are reaching new areas. In so many cases, they are accepted locally. The community
Yeah.
actually accept, at least for JNIM we're talking about, they accept the presence of JNIM. They feel that JNIM is providing them with a quick sense of justice. They provide them with governance, sometimes even regulate market prices. They actually regulate work in gold mines. They give opportunity to everyone. They keep the prices down. So it's actually, they are actually, as a group, they're actually doing well for their community, and therefore the community in marginalized areas accept them.
Oh my God. You mean like they're controlling like literally everything? I mean, I heard
They
you
can,
saying that they're
yes,
controlling
in
prices
areas
in the
like,
sense.
oh no,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely, they regulate markets. They have their own governance system. They provide
Oh
services.
my God.
They also have a justice system in place. They also resolve conflict between tribes
Hmm.
or communities. They are involved in in every aspect of life of the local community. They also in so many occasions brokered, for example, ceasefire agreements between the Fulani community and the Dogon community. These two communities are known for intercommunal violence or instances of intercommunal violence. In places like Burkina Faso, they actually control artisanal gold mining sites, and they allow They allow workers to come in and make money. They allow women to come in and inside these gold mines areas to sell their food and goods and provide security for these locations. So yes, it is. It is a very. It is JNIM is different than IS. JNIM is
Yeah.
actually more accepted locally. They have their own philosophy and they are thinking of how to win the hearts and minds of people. And in so
Yeah.
many areas on occasions, they actually have done that.
Yeah. So they're politically and culturally smart when it comes to, I mean, like, I'm just, when you're telling all these things, I was just comparing this situation when you said like the Western operation has failed, this situation with Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because I believe Taliban is not to this level. They still have a lot, I would say, Chinese interference right now going on, quite a lot. I mean, like, Taliban might be currently like, just maybe someone who is China is kind of handholding them at a lot of
Yes.
places. And similarly, because Afghanistan and Pakistan currently are not in a good relation, so India and Russia are also now becoming some of the, I would say, shadow actors over there as well, along with that. So, but I feel this situation that you explained about JNIM, this is much far more bigger than what we are observing in Asia.
Exactly.
Basically,
Exactly.
it's far more
To
bigger.
be it's I understand why it could, like, to so many people it could
Yeah.
resemble something from Taliban, but to me, I think JNM is heading. It's actually more similar to HTS in Syria, so Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria, which is a violent extremist group, or used to be a violent extremist group that was for a while allied with Al-Qaeda, then broke its alliance with Al-Qaeda and became a national VEO, and then showed so much pragmatism. And actually, the HTS was the reason for the fall of Assad, and now we are seeing personnel of that movement in government, including the head of that movement who became the president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara. So I feel that JNIM holds resemblance to HTS because they are more focused on becoming a national armed group in the country, but possibly a group with a political agenda. They have been showing pragmatism in dealing with international organizations, for example, or international aid organizations specifically. They
Yes.
have been showing pragmatism in dealing with the people and the way they govern, and also like the most recent attack that we talked about, the attack on the 25th of April, showed that JNIM is actually open to work with a local
Yes.
rebel group that is far more liberal than JNIM and actually more on the secular side and holds a totally different political agenda to their ideological agenda. So maybe we are seeing JNIM now rebranding itself. Maybe we are seeing JNIM
Yes.
showing more pragmatism, and maybe it will be a very important, at some point, maybe not now, but it will be at some point an important political actor that will have a say in the future of these countries, in the countries of Central Sahel. So here, when we talk about Central Sahel, we're talking Niger, Burkina Faso, and
Yes.
Mali.
And yeah, I'm coming exactly to that part only. So, why the rebel groups in Mali and Niger choosing to cooperate with jihadist organizations they once fought against the same organization,
Yes.
actually? And is this purely tactical survival, or is the Sahel entering a permanent era of anti state alliances?
Mm. So yes, indeed, there were times when the rebel groups had disagreements with JNIM. There were instances where they fought against each other, but we have to think that in the Central Sahel, in northern Mali specifically, tribal links are very important, community links are very important. So we know that although the rebels in northern Mali and JNIM don't have the same political agenda and don't have the same ideology, but we know that they are related in so many ways. By related, I mean that they have tribal links. The head of JNIM, Amir Iyad Al-Ghali, for example, is a very respected Tuareg leader who is from a noble tribe. So the tribal links here play a role, and if we think of the tribal mentality, no enemy is an enemy forever, and no friend is a friend forever. So although they have disagreements, but the tribal links prevail, and they can overlook these disagreements if it's for the greater benefit. The greater benefits here is actually to conduct attacks against the Malian army, but also sort of defeat the Russian partner, Africa Corps. In terms of the tactical advantage, both are very strong in conducting attacks. JNIM is more operational on the ground with emplacing, they are really good at emplacing IEDs and ambushing the Malian army,
Yes.
while the FLA, for example, they've mastered the warfare of drones. They constantly conduct drone attacks on the Malian army and Wagner. So they were able probably to cooperate, or they will be able to exchange knowledge and maybe cooperate on operational level. For the FLA, by cooperating with JNIM, they were able to basically be involved in attacks close to the capital. This is something the rebels in northern Mali were never able to do before.
Yes.
So I guess they both saw some benefit from cooperating together. On the long run, it's going to be really difficult to know where each group will head or how things will pan
Yes.
out. But I guess at that time, they thought that together they could inflict more pain and conduct bigger attacks against the National Army and the Russians.
Yes, coming to this part of Niger, last time I believe we spoke about France. I think when we recorded the podcast, I think the French situation was very much heated up back then because Russia was moving into this region, trying to create a lot of influence. So, following up on that, now we are not going to speak so much about France, but on other actors. Niger was once considered the West's reliable, I would say, security partner in the Sahel region. So, after the coups, expulsion of the US forces, and rising Russian influence, so has Washington effectively lost the Sahel? And just a little bit on the top of the question, in case, like, if you know about this, even I haven't, by the way, searched so much deeply about it, but when President Trump took the office this year, one of the agendas in their security strategy, US releases security strategy every year, or I think every 2 years. Basically, they declassify a lot of things and give an outlook on what is coming next. Africa was considered not as a military partnership territory, but it is considered more of an economic territory now. They want to basically block out all Chinese influence in the region and inject all the US economic forces over there rather than the US military. So that was one of the agendas in there. So in case, like, if you can connect both this point and let us know, that would be great. In case you're not fully completely aware, because
Yes,
I know the security strategy of US going into the depths is like doing a PhD itself.
yeah, exactly. So on the US and Niger, yes, and exactly, we have discussed this extensively last time. The thing is, like we said about the European partner, yes, the US now is not part of the conflict in the Sahel or in fighting terrorism in the Sahel region. They had to withdraw completely. They left their very expensive base in Niger. And now they are not involved. Niger has a new president who came again in a coup. The whole dynamic has changed, and it looks like, just like the Europeans, the US is suddenly not interested in the Sahel region or in what's going to happen. And now they've left it completely to first the national armies there, but also the Russian partner. But in terms of what the US is doing now, we have seen, yes, the US is sort of closed the door on Niger or closed the door on the Sahel and Niger, but opened another door on Nigeria. We have seen on the 25th of
Yes.
December last year, for example, and in many other later occasions, that the US has conducted airstrikes against IS in the region or in northern Nigeria. Here, the dynamic is very important because the airstrikes or the region that the US has targeted is actually a region where IS, the Islamic State Sahel province, operates in. So it's not against ISWAP, or this is the my understanding at least. So although they are operating in Nigeria in cooperation with the Nigerian army and with the approval of the government and the president Tinubu there, but they are still fighting at least a group or a subgroup of Islamic State Sahel province. So yes, the it's a different country, different ground, but it is the same actor. But yes, we haven't seen the US conducting
Yes.
counterterrorism operations in Niger. We haven't seen any cooperation, or I haven't seen any cooperation on the ground between US forces and Niger forces. And just like the Europeans, the US have again closed the door on that chapter. Let's put it that way.
And coming to the part of Europe, I think you closed the answer with the Europe. So I'd like to basically briefly ask you about that, because we see a lot of, still till today, I think a lot of immigration flow that is coming through North Africa, quite a lot
Mm.
actually. And Europe fears the Sahel not only because of terrorism, but because instability there directly impacts the migration, maybe even energy routes and the Mediterranean security as well, because we saw what was happening in the Yemen, Syria as well. People were just, coming in the boats, and it was like overloaded. Half of the, I think, European security, more than what they were able to accommodate, they were overloaded. So, from your perspective, could the collapse of the Sahel become Europe's next major geopolitical nightmare?
Yeah, so like you said, Omkar, so North Africa is actually very close to Europe, and all major immigration routes have to go through the Sahel region and then to Spain and the rest of Europe. So the European concern is it's not just terror and human rights violations happening in the Sahel region. It is actually how it could impact Europe, because the more terror there is, the more immigration there will be. And we're not like far off from that. We already see that European countries, specifically Spain, are conducting operations against illegal immigration. The problem is not just also legal immigration, it's not just immigrants coming into Europe, it's immigrants or elements, members of communities coming with a specific ideology. So we already have seen, for example, some operations that clamp down on cells or arrested individuals in Morocco or in Spain that are loosely affiliated with Islamic State Sahel province. So what could be dangerous here is the spillover of Islamic State Sahel province into Europe. So we know that the Islamic State ideology exists in Europe, or there is individuals associated with it, and that's why European countries always work on counterterrorism policies and activity. But here we might see some individuals or cells associated with a specific branch of IS that could come to Europe or already are in Europe. That's in terms of fear from Islamic State. In terms of JNIM, so Al-Qaeda branch in Sahel, I think JNIM is a more local violent extremist organization. It's more nationalized. Actually, in so many occasions, the group stated that they are not interested in conducting attacks outside of Africa, and they're not conducting. They are not interested in attacking the Europeans if they're not on African soil. If we look at the rebranding that they're doing, their activities inside the country, or even their governance style, we can clearly say that they are not interested in becoming a global violent
Yes.
extremist organization. Even their association with Al Qaeda Central is becoming more loose now. And we can see JNIM more focused on the internal dynamics of uh, the Sahel Central rather than the global jihad. So we can say that JNIM is breaking away from the global jihad and focusing on local activities. And therefore, maybe JNIM won't impose risk on Europe the same way Islamic State Sahel province does. I
Okay.
hope it's clear the view dynamics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we are almost at the end of the episode now. So I would like to ask this question again, moving back on a much more broader scale. If the governments in the Sahel region continue losing like the territorial control, which is really not good, while the foreign powers like, maybe from Europe or North America, like US, keep on competing for the influence. I mean, that's what we have seen not only in Africa, but in all other places as well. Like this powers keep on competing for the influence than actually basically going on ground and basically helping the governments a lot of times. So are we heading towards the creation of Africa's first large scale ungoverned jihadist belt stretching from Atlantic to the Red Sea? Because if that's the case, I think it's going to be very different in terms of dynamics of economics and the politics as well.
Of course, of course. I mean, yes and no, in a sense that I don't think that the let me just like tell you how I think this conflict will unfold. What could happen now with, yes, like you said, these military regimes are trying to fight these VEOs. They are conducting counterterrorism operations. They are doing everything in the textbook to clamp down on terrorists in the country or in the countries. They also have even joint forces. So Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso have joint forces to combat terrorism in the tri-border area. So they're doing everything that they could do to fight terrorism. But again, the dynamics are too complicated.
Yes.
JNIM, for example, and the Islamic State are so imbricated in the community. So sometimes it's hard to tell when JNIM starts and when the community starts. So it's very mixed dynamic, which makes it even more difficult to clamp down on or defeat. How it's gonna unfold, what's gonna happen in these countries, I think maybe with time we could see JNIM actually rebranding itself. We could see JNIM becoming a political actor in at least Mali. So they might actually open a dialogue. Bamako might open a dialogue with JNIM. They might reach some settlement. They might reach some peace agreements or ceasefire agreements and have possibly JNIM presence more accepted in certain areas. We might see JNIM becoming more pragmatic and becoming more an actor that can be even with years internationally accepted. With IS, we have seen that in the past that the president of Niger, Mohamed Bazoum, wanted to open also lines of communications, wanted also to speak with the IS in northern Niger. However, he didn't. His plan was not executed. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're not going to see, or this is my personal opinion, I don't think that we're going to see JNIM or IS actually taking control of a country or establishing itself as the only governing body in one of these countries. I think it will always be a mix of contested areas, a mix of mixed governance, a mix of blurred lines, and then it's not going to be just a one governing body that protects the country. And that goes also for the governments in these regions. So I don't see them
Yes.
also being able of establishing themselves as the only governing body. So it is, I know this is not a clear answer to you, but I guess it will be a mix of blurred lines for a very long time before we know what's going to happen exactly. It will be JNIM always at the forefront of of being a pragmatic actor in this mix
Yes,
of dynamics.
absolutely. I think just to put it into perspective, maybe, I mean, like, I'm coming out from my shoes of being an expert in the security domain and all, and I'm just looking at a bigger picture of what I've observed
Yes,
overall, not only in this region, but in the other parts of the world where such similar situations are there. I feel at the end of the day, when someone offers you that kind of stature on a global scale, or especially in terms of both financial and politically, it doesn't take so much time for even the extremist group to think tactically in that matter.
yes,
For example, I think the very recent cases of Taliban. I mean, before actually the US left, they were completely, I would say, wild at the kind of approaches or even to sit down and speak with the countries. But now things are very different. I mean, a diplomatic mission goes to Taliban. They sign the agreements. There is an economic exchange that is happening, and we saw this complete change. And I feel what you answered is in a very right way, that we can see a mix of both. A kind of a case like Taliban, but I would say this will be much more at the stakes are much more higher over here. I would say, as
yes,
multiple countries are involved in here in this region. So yeah, thank
exactly.
you very much, Aman, for this perspective and great insights as
Thank you
usual.
so much for having me again.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm really thankful that such experts like you are existing who are covering the conflicts which are not so much in the mainstream media. It is very
Oh,
important
thank you
that
very much.
people need to know that there is a world beyond what you see on the mainstream media, and that
Of
might
course,
even affect at a larger scale, because Africa is the resource hub of the world when it comes to rare earth metals and everything. Basically, it's not only just that.
of course.
So keeping it secure, keeping it safe is much more important in the same way as the other regions of the world are. So yeah, thank you very much again, and I hope to
Thank you
record
so
more
much for
such
having me.
episodes in the future. Yes,
Thank you very
absolutely.
much. Thank you.
Yes.
Have a good day.